Deere has confirmed a total of 238 people will be laid off. That includes 115 people at Harvester Works in East Moline, 52 people at Seating and Cylinder in Moline, and 71 people at Foundry in Waterloo, Iowa. Deere says the layoffs are due to decreased demand and lower order volumes.
President Donald Trump has threatened a 200% tariff on John Deere products if the company moves manufacturing to Mexico.
Thousands of dollars on tractors, combines, and the like. But for years, John Deere manufacturers told farmers they didn't have the right to make their own repairs.
The sudden wave of layoffs and facility closures tied to John Deere has sent shockwaves through Texas, igniting economic anxiety and political fury across the state. Manufacturing towns that once depended on steady industrial employment are now facing an abrupt reckoning, as production lines slow, plants shut their doors, and thousands of workers are left grappling with uncertainty. In Texas, where industrial strength and job creation are deeply woven into political identity, the situation has escalated into a full-blown crisis that has triggered a visibly volatile response from the state's highest office. For years, Texas promoted itself as a haven for manufacturing, boasting low taxes, business-friendly regulations, and a massive labor force. John Deere operations were often cited as proof that global manufacturers could thrive within the state's borders. That narrative is now under severe strain. Layoffs are not being framed as isolated corporate decisions but as symbolic failures that challenge the promise of economic stability. Entire communities built around these facilities are watching their economic anchors disappear, leaving behind fear, anger, and a growing sense of betrayal. The closures are particularly devastating because of their ripple effects. Each manufacturing job supports a network of secondary employment, from suppliers and logistics to restaurants and local services. When a John Deere facility reduces operations or shuts down entirely, the damage spreads far beyond the factory gates. In Texas towns already vulnerable to economic swings, this sudden contraction threatens housing markets, school funding, and municipal budgets. What begins as a corporate restructuring quickly transforms into a regional economic emergency. The reaction from the governor of Texas has been intense and emotionally charged. Public statements have grown increasingly sharp, condemning corporate leadership and questioning the logic behind moving production or cutting jobs while profits remain strong elsewhere. The tone has shifted from measured concern to outright outrage, reflecting not only political pressure but genuine alarm over the broader implications for the Texas economy. This response resonates with workers who feel abandoned, yet it also exposes the limits of state power when confronted with multinational corporate decisions. At the heart of the controversy lies the tension between corporate globalization and local economic dependence. John Deere, like many large manufacturers, operates within a global framework that prioritizes efficiency, cost reduction, and shareholder value. Decisions about layoffs and closures are often justified through spreadsheets rather than community impact. In Texas, this reality clashes with the long-standing belief that loyalty to business-friendly policies would guarantee reciprocal loyalty from corporations. The breakdown of that assumption has fueled resentment and disbelief. Workers affected by the layoffs describe a sudden collapse of certainty. Many had spent decades building skills specific to manufacturing roles that are not easily transferable. Severance packages and short-term assistance do little to address the long-term challenge of reemployment in regions where alternative industries are scarce. Retraining programs exist, but they require time, resources, and a level of stability that many displaced workers no longer have. The emotional toll is compounded by the feeling that their dedication was ultimately disposable. The closures also raise questions about the future of manufacturing in the USA. Texas has long positioned itself as a leader in industrial growth, yet the John Deere situation underscores how vulnerable even strong states are to global market shifts. Automation, offshoring, and changing demand patterns continue to reshape production strategies. When facilities close despite favorable state conditions, it signals that incentives alone may no longer be enough to secure long-term commitments from major manufacturers. Political fallout has been swift. Lawmakers face pressure from constituents, demanding accountability and intervention. Emergency meetings, public hearings, and calls for federal involvement from the USA have intensified, yet concrete solutions remain elusive. States cannot easily force corporations to maintain operations, and punitive measures risk deterring future investment. The governor of Texas finds itself trapped between the desire to project strength and the reality of limited leverage. Community leaders are scrambling to respond. Economic development offices are searching for replacement industries, while local governments struggle to support suddenly unemployed residents. Nonprofit organizations report increased demand for assistance, from food aid to housing support. The social consequences of the layoffs are becoming visible as stress-related health issues and family instability rise. What was once a stable working-class environment is now marked by uncertainty and fear. The anger surrounding the situation reflects deeper structural issues within the American economic model. Manufacturing communities are repeatedly asked to adapt to forces beyond their control, while policy responses lag behind corporate decision-making. In Texas, the John Deere layoffs have become a flashpoint for broader debates about labor protections, corporate responsibility, and the true cost of economic flexibility. The governor of Texas, facing mounting frustration, has amplified these concerns in increasingly dramatic fashion. As the crisis unfolds, trust is eroding on multiple levels. Workers question whether promises of job security ever meant anything. Communities doubt whether economic development strategies truly protect their future. Political leadership faces skepticism about its ability to shield citizens from global market forces. The emotional intensity of the response from the governor of Texas reflects this erosion, signaling a recognition that the stakes extend far beyond a single company. The closures linked to John Deere are not just an economic event. They are a cultural rupture. In Texas, where pride in work and production runs deep, the loss of manufacturing jobs cuts at the core of identity. The situation has exposed vulnerabilities that were long ignored and forced an uncomfortable reckoning with the realities of modern industry. As layoffs continue and facilities fall silent, the state confronts a defining question about what kind of economic future it can realistically promise to its people within the shifting landscape of the USA. The aftermath of the John Deere layoffs and closures in Texas continues to deepen, evolving from an employment shock into a broader economic and political reckoning. What initially appeared to be a corporate restructuring has now exposed long-standing vulnerabilities in how industrial employment is protected, valued, and sustained. Across Texas, the sense of disbelief has hardened into anger as workers, families, and local officials realize that the damage will not be temporary. The closures are reshaping entire regions, forcing a confrontation with realities that political optimism had long obscured. Manufacturing communities in Texas were built on the assumption of continuity. Plants were not just workplaces but anchors around which daily life revolved. Schools, housing developments, retail districts, and public services grew in direct response to the stability these facilities once provided. When John Deere began scaling back operations, that stability fractured almost overnight. The layoffs did not merely remove income. They disrupted the rhythm of life, leaving behind empty parking lots, shuttered storefronts, and neighborhoods struggling to adjust to sudden decline. The emotional response from the governor of Texas reflects more than political theater. It signals a collision between ideology and outcome. For years, Texas emphasized deregulation and corporate incentives as the foundation of economic growth. The expectation was clear: create the most favorable environment possible, and businesses would reward the state with long-term investment and job security. The John Deere closures shattered that narrative. When production left despite those incentives, it raised uncomfortable questions about whether the strategy was ever sufficient. In a globalized economy, workers impacted by the layoffs describe a profound sense of abandonment. Many structured their lives around these jobs, purchasing homes, raising families, and planning retirement with the expectation of stability. The sudden loss of employment has forced difficult choices, from relocating to other states within the USA to accepting lower-paying work with fewer benefits. For older workers, the prospects are especially grim, as decades of specialized experience do not easily translate into new industries. The feeling that loyalty was met with indifference has intensified resentment toward both corporate leadership and policymakers. Local economies are now experiencing secondary collapse. Small businesses that depended on manufacturing wages are seeing revenue dry up. Restaurants, auto dealers, and service providers report declining sales as households tighten spending. Property values are beginning to slip, eroding municipal tax bases and threatening funding for schools and infrastructure. In Texas, where local governments rely heavily on economic growth to sustain services, this contraction is creating fiscal stress that will persist long after the factories close. The closures have also reignited debates about the role of manufacturing in the USA. While policymakers frequently praise domestic production, the reality on the ground tells a different story. Automation and global supply chains have reduced the need for labor while increasing pressure to cut costs. Even companies that remain profitable may choose to downsize or relocate if it improves margins. Texas, despite its size and economic power, is not immune to these forces. The John Deere situation underscores how fragile industrial employment has become, even in states considered business strongholds. The response options available to Texas leadership are limited and fraught with risk. Direct intervention in corporate decisions is constrained by legal and economic realities. Financial penalties could deter future investment, while additional incentives may appear to reward behavior that harms workers. Appeals for federal support from the USA offer some relief, but national programs are often slow and insufficient for crises of this scale. The visible frustration from the governor of Texas reflects the narrowing space for effective action. Community leaders are attempting to pivot toward diversification, promoting technology, logistics, or renewable energy as potential replacements for lost manufacturing jobs. However, such transitions require time, capital, and workforce retraining. Displaced workers cannot simply wait years for new industries to take root. In the meantime, social safety nets are stretched thin. Food assistance programs, unemployment offices, and nonprofit organizations are overwhelmed by demand, revealing gaps in support systems that were never designed for mass industrial displacement. The psychological impact of the layoffs is becoming increasingly evident. Job loss on this scale carries stigma, stress, and a sense of diminished worth. Families face uncertainty about healthcare access, education expenses, and long-term security. Mental health challenges are rising, yet access to care remains limited, particularly in smaller Texas communities. The closure of a factory leaves behind not just economic voids but emotional scars that linger long after the machines fall silent. Politically, the situation has altered the tone of public discourse. Voters are more skeptical of promises about job creation and economic resilience. There is growing demand for accountability, transparency, and structural reform. The anger directed at corporate decisions has spilled over into broader critiques of economic policy, questioning whether the benefits of growth are distributed fairly or whether communities are simply expendable components of a global system. In Texas, this shift threatens to reshape alliances and priorities in ways that extend beyond a single crisis. The John Deere layoffs have also drawn attention to labor protections and worker representation. Many argue that stronger safeguards could have mitigated the damage or provided clearer pathways for transition. Others counter that excessive regulation risks accelerating corporate exit. This tension reflects a deeper dilemma within the USA: how to balance competitiveness with social responsibility in an era of rapid economic change. Texas now finds itself at the center of that debate, forced to reconcile ideology with lived experience. As weeks turn into months, the initial shock is giving way to a more sobering realization. The closures are not an isolated event but part of a broader pattern affecting manufacturing nationwide. Texas, despite its resources and influence, cannot fully insulate itself from these trends. The visible outrage from the governor of Texas underscores an acknowledgement that the tools traditionally used to attract and retain industry may no longer be enough. The long-term consequences will depend on choices made now. Investment in retraining, infrastructure, and economic diversification could soften the blow, but such efforts require sustained commitment rather than symbolic gestures. Rebuilding trust with workers and communities will demand more than rhetoric. It will require a candid reassessment of how economic success is defined and who is protected when market forces turn hostile. The John Deere closures have become a defining moment for Texas, exposing the fragility beneath confidence and growth. They have forced a reckoning with the limits of state power, the realities of global industry, and the human cost of corporate decision-making. As the fallout continues, the crisis stands as a warning that prosperity built without resilience can unravel quickly, leaving leaders, workers, and communities scrambling to pick up the pieces. Within an unforgiving economic landscape of the USA,